What is up? One last ride. Welcome to the DFS Academy for the wild NFL Week 18. Most fantasy championships are done unless you are one of those diehard players who have a Week 18 championship. I commend you, and I feel sorry for you at the same time, because if you thought you didn't know anything about fantasy football last week, wait until Week 18. You're going to hear names you haven't heard all season. There's going to be surprise touchdowns. It's going to be a really fun week for those who play DFS, and I think we're going to have a lot of fun with it. Let's get into the show. What is up? Welcome to the DFS Academy for NFL Week 18, the final show of the season. I'm your host, Ryan Weisse. With me, as always, Austin Amandolia. Austin, we took a week off for the holiday. We're back at it, ready to send this thing out in style with, like I mentioned, a bunch of players nobody's ever heard of.
Yeah, Week 18. It's going to be great. Although I'm in that weird boat where I'm like, I should be thankful that I have something to root for in Week 18 because the Falcons still have something to play for. But I also would love to not have anything to root for in Week 18 and just be able to chill out.
Yeah, just finally be done with it because it's been such a long damn season. No, super interesting that the Falcons are still in this, because typically you don't make the move to a rookie quarterback this late in the season because you're still in contention. It'll be interesting to see how this all shakes out for your Atlanta Falcons. Guys, this is a DFS show. And if you are new to DFS, or if you're new to fantasy football, Week 18 means some weird stuff. You're going to have teams that are going to rest all of their starters. You're going to have starters who are going to play a drive or two like they did in the preseason. And then it's just a lot of bench players. But there's another interesting aspect to this: salary incentives. There are players who need to hit certain milestones this week to get paid a lot of extra money. And those are the types of things that are good to know in DFS. They're good to know if you do prop betting. I know I played a lot of it into my strategy on some of the players I picked, Austin. I'm sure you did the same. I saw that I agree with most of the players you have picked. So let's get into it. If you guys have never tuned into this show before, we do the show in two segments. Cash games, which is where you're going to build your bankroll. It's I don't want to say the smaller contest, but the contest where half the field gets paid, basically. So you're going to put your safest lineup out there. And then the second half of the show, we talk about tournaments. These are your Milli makers and all the crazy stuff. But because it makes no sense, one of these days we might have to fix this. We like to start with what we call answers to the test. And that is last week's Milli making lineup. Now, we did not do a show last week, so we didn't tell you to start any of these players. But Austin, what an interesting lineup to take down the Milli maker last week. 241 points, which is about 40 points off of the season high. The winning lineup was Baker Mayfield, Jonathan Taylor, Bucky Irving, Mike Evans, Devonta Smith, Adam Thielen, Juwan Johnson, Tyler Conklin, and the Philly defense. So right away, I noticed, obviously, it's a big bet on the Tampa Bay Carolina game, Austin, which we didn't get a chance to talk last week, but I read your article. That was a game worth betting on.
Yes.
We've never talked about a defense wide receiver stack. It's normally a defense running back stack. But Austin, we got to get started with, this is the second Milli maker this season to win with two tight ends. And I don't know. We made fun of Kelly for that for a long time. And now there are two millionaires out there. And this one might be the worst of the bunch. The last one I think had good tight ends. Juwan Johnson and Tyler Conklin in a single. What were they thinking, Austin? Like, I imagine they had a lot of lineups.
Yeah, no, they definitely had to have a lot of lineups. And I think this is the nature of these large field 150 enter contests, is like somebody's going to have something super weird and unique that gets up to the top. It's definitely not like there's a reason that we don't recommend it for most of your contests. Like, yeah, it happened 2 times this year. That's still only 2 out of 17 weeks.
There you go.
Not a high percentage. And it's happening likely even less in some of the smaller field contests. So I stand by the strategy for large field stuff like the Milli maker. It's worth it every now and then, especially if you just have a sense that like a particular game is going to go off and the pass catcher to have is the tight end. But yeah, we didn't talk about this game, but I am going to brag a little bit because my best DFS lineup last week did have Baker Mayfield, Bucky Irving, Mike Evans. I brought it back with Jalen Coker instead of Adam Thielen. But it was a strong start, and I definitely had my I had my exposure to Jonathan Taylor as well. So it was a fun little week for DFS last week.
So Austin, because it was kind of a laid back week, I decided to try something that you've been preaching forever. And I was like, you know what? Let me listen to this guy and see if it works out. So I made 2 lineups last week, Austin. I took my risky quarterback, which was Bryce Young. So I was on the opposite end of this stack, but it worked out. So I went Bryce Young, Adam Thielen, Mike Evans, or more importantly, Bucky Irving, because that was the better bring back if the story I was telling myself. So that was my risky lineup. And I put that into 5 of the, I've blown through my bankroll, as I've told you guys. So I put it in 5 of the lower dollar tournaments on FanDuel. I tend to play on FanDuel, even though this whole show is based on DraftKings. So I put it in 5 on FanDuel. Then I made a safer lineup. Now, it didn't work out as well, Austin, because I went Sam Darnold at quarterback, and he did not have the greatest week. He did enough. But I built a safer lineup, built around Sam Darnold, and put it in 5 head-to-heads. I decided not to do 50-50s. I just picked 5 random. I cashed in all 10 tournaments is the point of this story. So by using your strategy and actually being responsible with my bankroll and just a complete idiot putting everything into one tournament using the same players, it actually worked out really well. And I'm trying to this has been a really fun year, Austin. I feel like I've learned more about DFS this year. So thank you. And I really want to go into next year more responsible and try to be a little bit more of a bankroll builder than just throwing all of my money at Milli makers and not winning anything. Because the other part of that we never really talk about, it gets defeating. You're like, am I seriously just going to keep doing this every week and losing money every week? And so I feel like the way a responsible person and not a psychopath like me does things, it when you win, even if it's $20 or $50, or I know you took down a rather large contest on Underdog this year. When you win something like that, it feels great, and your bankroll set up for a while, and everything just feels safer and better. And that's how I'm going to approach 2025 in a large part, Austin, to doing a show with you for 18 weeks and understanding that there are better and more responsible ways than drafting A.T. Perry in the 18th round of every best ball draft that year.
Yeah. Well, and I talk about it a lot with the best ball stuff too. And I think for Underdog, it's a big bummer when you're kicked out of the semifinals and you watch everybody else go and make it to the finals, because it's so hard to advance in those contests.
Yeah, I had
to these DFS tournaments.
I had one team that missed the finals and one of the schnauzers by 7 points, and it was rough.
I had a team that missed moving to the semifinals by no shit 0.36 points.
Oh wow. I was me hurt. Me and Chris Molina actually in the exact same schnauzer made it to the semis, and Chris made it to the finals. But from what I understand, he did not do well in the final. I mean, everybody in the finals gets something, so he probably did well enough. I just know he didn't win. I'm not going to name drop because I don't know if he's putting it out there in the public, but I will say that one of our very important DFS minds at Football Guys took down the $500,000 drafters tournament this past weekend. Nice. And so he had been keeping us posted. At one point, Austin, at going into week 17, he had 10 of the top 25 teams. So he was going to make a lot of money.
That's incredible.
It came down to he had 3 finish, I think, in the top 15 and took down about $550,000 in DFS. So that was another decision I made, Austin, is I'm okay at DFS, but I had a lot more fun with the Underdog stuff this year. So I'm allocating a little bit more of my bankroll to Underdog. And the other part about that is, I hope this is interesting to people who are listening. The other part about that is I need to also allocate my time better. I keep a certain amount of money in Underdog to do these drafts. And then I get so busy during the summer. In August, I'm trying to knock out drafts every half an hour, and it just gets tiring. And then Austin, you know me well enough to know I end up building the same team 800 times because I don't think when I'm drafting, I just take who I think are the better players, and it doesn't always work out real well for me. So I more discipline is my goal in DFS and best ball for 2025.
Yeah. I mean, it's the way you go. And the final thought on that was going to be, you get kicked out of the finals, but if you have all those sit and go tournaments, you get to sit and say oh, I'm still winning a bunch of money. I ended up being up $300 on my sit and go tournaments. that $300 could fund my tournament hobby and insulate the losses that I had for tournaments, because like I'm not taking down tournaments this year. Like I'm trying to, I'm being strategic about it, and I feel good about a lot of the lineups I built, but like those tournaments are hard, and so it's nice to have a way that you can still make money and have fun along the way. Like winning a $25 12-person team, you get $195. That feels good regardless of what you did elsewhere.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like I said, discipline is going to be the main factor as we head in. But this week, not this week, man. This week we're going wild because the players are wild. We're going to get started, guys, with the cash portion of the show. We break it down into segments where Austin is going to tell you the high price, low price, all the players in between that he likes. We start things off with top of the class, players that are 8K or more. These are your chalk players, but it's the chalk you want to eat. And Austin, I promise you, when I made my tournament lineup, I knew who your top of the class was going to be, because I was going to go contrarian to your top of the class, and this worked out exactly how I thought it would. Talk to him.
Yeah. So Bijan Robinson is really the only player priced above 8K that I feel really confident in this week. Yeah. He's $8,500 on DraftKings, $9,200 on FanDuel. Part of this is just like, this is the nature of week 18. Some of the studs are going to sit. Saquon Barkley could be a great player this week, but he is not starting. It's already been announced that he's going to be sitting out this week. Puka Nacua, likely to be sitting out this week. Yeah. Jonathan Taylor, he probably will play, but there's a chance that if Indy is up, like there's nothing to play for in this game. They could sit him. Josh Jacobs, he might play because they're seeding there. And then Mike Evans, but I don't like that for cash, right? So Bijan Robinson is clearly the guy, that expensive guy, and he's probably going to be ridiculously chalky in these cash lineups because of the matchup being so good against the Carolina Panthers, who they've just been shredded by running backs. They've been the team to pick on all year long. And we have seen, in particular, these last 2 weeks since Michael Penix has taken over at the quarterback spot, they have run the ball a ton in Atlanta and focused on establishing the run early in the game. Robinson has 2 consecutive weeks with 2 touchdowns. He's gotten at least 20 touches in 5 consecutive games. Like, they're going to continue relying on him, and I see no reason why they wouldn't do that this week, especially when the only way they have to make it to the playoffs is a win.
And we talked about this. Penix's first game, that wasn't against Carolina as well, was it? Like 2 weeks ago?
No.
I don't remember who it was against, but it was against the team where I said, do we gamble on this kid? The Giants. Do we gamble on this kid? And you said, in tournaments, go for it, this kid being Penix. But you want Bijan, and this feels like the exact same game all over again, where against the Giants, Penix was asked to be a game manager. Against whoever they played last week, he needed to throw the ball more. This week again, he really just needs to be a game manager. And so, get the ball to Bijan, let him do his thing. I hate talking about players that you didn't bring up, but you said something interesting. You said you don't like Mike Evans for tournament. For cash, rather. I apologize. I think he's going to be high rostered because I don't think there's a player incentive-wise who is more in the news this week than Mike Evans. Do you not think that everybody knows Mike Evans needs 85 yards and either 1 or 2 touchdowns? Everybody knows this, including Baker Mayfield, and he spoke about it. Does that not lend itself to everybody going in on Evans and making him chalk? And then I kind of wonder, Austin, I hate saying this, does that make Mike Evans kind of bad chalk? Because I feel like there's a world where Tampa Bay also in a pretty easy game gets out. Mike Evans gets his 86 yards and a touchdown, and they sit him down, and then you just got 14 points out of your guy. And I don't know how much I love that. So
I think some of it is salary. There's not a ton of cheap running backs that I'm loving right now this week. That may change between now and Saturday. When I'm posting the article and setting my final lineups. I think it's a little bit I think the ceiling is a little bit, I think the floor and the ceiling is a little safer with Robinson. Yeah. And it's going to be hard to get both Robinson and Mike Evans.
That's probably going to have to
pick either or. And for me, I would rather pick Robinson, because if I have to choose between Bijan Robinson and Jalen McMillan, as a combo versus Mike Evans and let's say Isaac Garendo, I'm going with Bijan Robinson.
There's no debate whatsoever. Yeah, that's such an excellent point. And the other part is when we get into these weird lineups, McMillan's not necessarily weird, but there are weird wide receivers out there that are still wildly underpriced that, like, if you just need to fill a lineup, you can probably find a receiver, whereas we don't exactly know what running backs are going to go weird. No, I like that a lot. Such a good point. Let's move on to the band nerds. These are the $6,000 to $8,000 players, folks. We basically say, you know, these guys are close. They're close to the top of the class, but they spend a little bit too much time on the instruments to make it. And Austin, you have two more guys. Well, excuse me, you have one guy who has a lot to play for this weekend, and another guy that just keeps playing well in spite of sometimes his team.
Yeah. So let's start with Jayden Daniels, the guy that has stuff to play for this weekend. Yeah. So the Washington Commanders do have something to play for. It's playoff seeding. If you think like, oh, that's not a big deal, whatever, who cares about playoff seeding? Here's the deal. If they lose this game, they are the 7th seed.
Yep.
If they are the 7th seed, they are playing the Philadelphia Eagles in the wild card round.
No bueno.
If they win this game, they are locked into the 6th seed, and they are playing either the Los Angeles Rams or the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, winner of the NFC South. I think they would rather play one of those two teams than the Philadelphia Eagles.
You're either giving an offense that doesn't belong here or a defense that doesn't belong here.
Exactly. Versus a team that has a legitimate chance at making the Super Bowl.
Yeah, we did our show last night. The Eagles are my Super Bowl pick. I think their defense is coming alive at the right time.
So they want to win. And Jayden Daniels has been a stud. He just tore up the Falcons. Yeah. And I think he's going to tear up the Cowboys this week. He's $7,800 on DraftKings, $8,700 on FanDuel. And part of it too is it's one of the safer quarterbacks where I know he has something to play for. Baker Mayfield, I'm intrigued by as well in cash. He's $7K for a quarterback that doesn't run the ball that much. Like, he may score a rushing touchdown, but it's like a weird week when he does that. And then there's a bunch of like scrubby backup quarterbacks in the 5 to 6K range. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't want to really rely on them. So going with Jayden Daniels feels very safe.
Yeah. Those backups, they feel fun to maybe build a tournament lineup around, but not a cash lineup. That's the opposite of cash. For me, Austin, there's like 5 quarterbacks. When I was doing my rankings this morning, there's like 5 quarterbacks I'd build a cash lineup around. And I'm not going to do all 5 because that's how I get myself in trouble. So I'm going to probably pick 1 or 2. But then, you know what, this seems like an opportune time, Austin, because I said I'm going to pick 1 or 2. This might not be the week to enter a bunch of cash either. We kind of touched on that before the show started.
Yeah, I'm not entering a ton of cash contests this week, in part because when there is so much more uncertainty on the slate, that's when tournament contests can become more interesting and more advantageous to play, because you can lean into that volatility, into the variance and the uncertainty there, and it enables you to hit the ceiling more. Whereas cash, like, it's a little bit fuzzy. I think there's some like really solid plays that you could probably go to in cash and it'd be fine. Like, the players that I picked, I feel really good about for cash lineups this week. But I'm probably going to be a little bit cautious because you just don't know. Like, if somehow Tampa Bay gets up by like 20 points, right? And you have Jalen McMillan in your lineup and he's doing fine at that point, but the Falcons are losing and Tampa Bay is like, they're not going to win. We're definitely going to win. Let's pull our starters. And that happening too early could be what the difference between Jalen McMillan hitting and you hitting the cash line or not. So there's just so much unknown in week 18 that I'll play some cash, but I think it makes sense to play a little bit less than you typically would, and maybe lean into more tournaments instead, where you can get unique. You can try some different lineups, get off the board, because there are going to be a couple of games that people are targeting a lot, and it gives you a chance to lean into that variance and have that high ceiling outcome.
Yeah, and for the other guy in this category, I don't think it's coincidence that from the second Adam Thielen came back, we're seeing better Bryce Young. These two seem to have a connection, and just that old man, young kid connection that is working out really, really well, at least fantasy wise, for the Carolina Panthers.
Yeah, well, and it's having good receiver talent helps. It does.
Yeah.
No offense to David Moore and Jalen Coker. They've played their butts off this year, but I wouldn't call them high end talent necessarily. But I am looking at Adam Thielen in cash because he continues to be a target hog. He's been a solid player the past 4 weeks to have both in cash and in tournaments. We saw him in the Milli Maker last week. And he's in this price range where it's pretty easy to get to him at that $6,200 range on DraftKings, $6,400 on FanDuel. I do prefer him slightly on DraftKings because he has that PPR volume, but also like as good as Jayden Daniels was last week, the Falcons secondary is not good.
Yeah.
And they are easily shredded. AJ Terrell does not shadow specific players. He will move around. And so basically anytime Adam Thielen ends up lining up against D Offord, he's probably going to get the ball. Yeah. Just like throwing that out there, and it's going to be good for Carolina. So that's why I'm looking at Adam Thielen, and it's also why I'll be looking at some other Carolina receivers in the tournament section.
Yeah, and that's kind of what so I think the good thing about for Thielen, the loss of Chuba Hubbard, and then the fact that they don't have a reliable tight end yet. I have such high hopes for Jatavian Sanders. He just hasn't got there yet. Thielen is their most reliable option inside the 20, the 10, the 5 at this point. And I just find it very interesting that this 32-year-old guy, 33-year-old guy is still just handling his business there for the Carolina Panthers. You love to see it, and I agree. Solid play this week. He'll be coming up again later in the show. As we move along to the Bookworms, easily underestimated players, but watch out. They could get you $4,000 to $6,000 players, Austin, and this is where I started talking about there's some good cheap wide receiver talent.
Yeah, so I've got a couple of options this week. First is DeMario Douglas playing. He's plays for the New England Patriots. First off, in case you're not familiar with his game.
Not a name a lot of people have heard a lot this season. So
yeah, they're going up against the Buffalo Bills, which you might say, oh, that doesn't seem like a good matchup. But Buffalo, they're sitting their starters. We already know Mitch Trubisky is going to be starting at quarterback. I assume that they're going to do the same with their defense, particularly because, side note, I feel like we haven't talked about how bad Buffalo defense has been this year.
That's what I was just going to say. Well, and they were so good for fantasy for like the first 8 weeks, but the numbers kind of felt like a mirage, and then they've just gotten so progressively worse. And then you touched on this all well, you were about to, I'm sure. Their secondary is awful, and now we're talking about the backup secondary.
Yeah, so since week 14, Buffalo has allowed the most points to the wide receiver position at 49.7 points per game. That is 5 points per game more than the third worst team against receivers. So they are particularly bad against receivers. So DeMario Douglas, here you go. And Patriots, maybe you'll get a win this week. Who knows? We'll see. So and also Douglas has shown he's a PPR volume hog.
Exactly. I was going to ask about that. Is when I did my rankings, Austin, I picked a different New England wide receiver, and I went with Kayshon Boutte because he has been kind of like the deep threat. And you kind of took my question. I think Douglas is probably the play on DraftKings, but I think Kayshon Boutte is an option over on FanDuel. So.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. My other receiver for this is Jalen McMillan, who I alluded to earlier. He is $5,100 on DraftKings, $6,100 on FanDuel. Now, he's gone on a touchdown tear over the past 4 weeks. It's 4 consecutive weeks with a touchdown. 2 of those games he had 2 touchdowns in. So he scored 6 touchdowns in the past 4 weeks. That is not why I'm betting on him this week for DFS Cash. If you take away his touchdowns, he's still been scoring double-digit fantasy points every week the past 4 weeks because he's been getting he's been getting enough volume and he's been getting high efficiency targets. So he's getting like 5 catches for 50 yards, 10 points for a guy that's at $5,100 on DraftKings. That's fine with me. And of course, because he's scoring so many touchdowns, it's clear like he's been an end zone, red zone threat. So that even gives you some more ceiling there. So I'm going back to McMillan this week because he's still just too cheap with the way that he's being utilized in this offense.
Completely agree. He and Mike Evans, you and I were in love with K. Dotton for about 3 weeks this season. And he and Mike Evans have made K. Dotton obsolete. Like this guy, K. Dotton and Sam Laporta must share talent because when Otton was good, Laporta was bad. And now that Otton's bad, Laporta's good again. So it's been such an interesting year for fantasy tight ends. But we wondered, could someone step into that Chris Godwin role. And it's not who I thought McMillan was as a player, but he certainly seems to be doing it at this point. So
yeah, he's looking really good. We saw like some flashes of it early in the season. I'm a little bummed about it too, frankly, because I really wanted Trey Palmer to be the guy to in this role. But McMillan he's been really good. I liked him in the pre-draft process, and it's panning out now down the stretch.
Yeah, I was gonna say those Washington wide receivers, we would like to have seen more from Jalen Polk, but Adunze's look good and McMillan's look good. And Polk, if he takes a year or two to develop, this Washington wide receiver class could have been very, very nice. C's get degrees, my favorite section of the show. These are the punt plays of the week. Austin, notoriously, it's been tight ends and defense, and so I think it's appropriate that we're ending with a tight end.
Yes, we are ending with a tight end. We're going back to 2023 summer of best ball streets, which was all of the Chickasee and Okonkwo hype. He is $3,800 on DraftKings. I don't understand how. He's only $5,400 on FanDuel. He's just been getting ridiculous target volume over the past few weeks now. I will say this is a little bit fraught with peril, so keep an eye out on what's going on. There is a chance that Tennessee plays both of their quarterbacks in this game.
Yeah, I didn't like that either.
So I don't love that. Be aware of that, but I think it's still worth it. Like, he's getting enough target volume, especially too if Tony Pollard sits.
Yeah.
Isn't playing. Like, that's gonna help Okonkwo as well. But he's also only $3,800. So even if he doesn't do that well, it's not that bad. I will also throw out Brenton Strange is still $3,500. He missed last week, so no points then, and kind of had a down week 2 weeks ago. But we have seen him have that like 10 target upside, which I don't expect to happen from him again. But that's another situation where I could see like punting a little bit further to get down to him. But I like Chig this week. He's just been getting consistent volume over the past few weeks.
For specifically your cash contest, Austin, you have always maintained that sometimes defense just doesn't matter in these contests. They all just kind of wash and you kind of hope. Are you going to stick with that motto for your week 18 and just take a cheap defense? The issue I've run into is a lot of the cheap defenses have nothing to play for. And so your options are you take one of these teams like Denver, who does have something to play for and they have a good defense. Or do you take a team like New England, who is facing all backups and just preying on the fact that like it's all backups? Maybe a defense that's kind of let us down all season could do something. So would you go super cheap and look for a weird situation, or are you likely to pay up a little bit for a little bit safer defense?
I'm still leaning into the idea that they don't really matter that much. And so we'll get into this when we talk about my lineup, but my cash defense that I'm looking at right now is actually the New York Giants going up against Tanner McKee. So it's a little bit of like what you said too about the fact that we're looking at teams that are sitting their starters and like betting against them because they have the backup in. I think Philadelphia is a good case of that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I'll be honest, when I did my rankings, I went the opposite route. I went with the like 5 teams that have something to play for. But like the more I'm thinking about it, it's like you said, like they don't matter. There's a good chance they have as good the bad teams have as good a chance of scoring a touchdown as the good teams. Defensive touchdowns just don't happen that often. And then the other part about all these backups is you're going to have guys that are playing on defense and special teams. So now you have the chance to have return touchdowns. I think it's actually a better strategy. I may actually change my defense rankings over on Football Guys completely. Like just the more I think about it, I'm like, I don't think it's worth paying up. Guys, that's going to wrap up the cash section of the show. And there are always some disclaimers I like to put out there. First and foremost is it's Thursday when we record this show, and we do it because it's convenient for us. And we like to get the show out on Friday for you guys. A ton of news is going to happen on Friday. An obscene amount of news this week is going to happen on Friday. We're going to find out a lot of starters who are and aren't playing. Games kick off on Saturday this week. Pay attention to that news. It's going to be very important. And I bring all this up because Austin writes an article covering his favorite cash plays. That drops every Saturday morning. Keep an eye out on that. That's going to have the most up-to-date information, and he gives you a full lineup that you're able to play there. We kind of touch on a lot of players on the show, but we don't exactly give a full lineup. He gives that in the article. And by the way, we don't just talk DFS. You can actually play with us as well. If you check the links in the description of this video or in Austin's article that drops on Saturday, there are links to contests that we run on DraftKings and FanDuel. $2 contest, just kind of for fun and bragging rights. And what I like to point out is bragging rights also means we're going to name the winner on this show. Now, I always run into this in week 18. The week 18 winner is not going to get named. So if you want to win a little bit of our money, but none of our fame, make sure you join that contest. Austin, let's move in to the tournament portion of the show. And again, if you've never watched, we break this down into positions where Austin's going to give you some of his favorite plays. I'm going to give you one of my favorite plays for the tournaments, the big swings, the Milli makers, or sometimes, the $100 makers. If you don't need to get into the most expensive tournaments, Ryan, Austin, talk to me about your favorite quarterback for tournaments this week.
Yeah, so I am trying to get a little bit off the board, and I'm sorry, I hate to tell you, Ryan, I think your tournament picks are super chalky, so I'm trying to think.
Okay, no, that's good to know, because I thought they weren't, and I'm happy to hear that. Like I said, the lineup I give on this show is a lineup I'm going to play against Austin. But Austin, I want you to tell me things like this because I want to know where my thought process is wrong. But let's talk about yours first, because I'm going to be honest, Austin, I think your pick is super chalky.
Well, quarterback, the benefit here is that
yeah,
quarterback can be chalky in tournaments, and it's okay. Just because, like, even when they're chalky, like, it's like 10% usually in tournaments. It's rare that they get above that. I am going with Bo Nix at my quarterback spot this week, and it's in part because Denver has something actually to play for. They are playing Kansas City. Kansas City is sitting their starters because they have nothing to play for. But Denver, they need to win to guarantee their playoff spot. If they lose and Miami or Cincinnati wins, the Broncos end up out of the playoffs, which is kind of wild, given how bad Miami and Cincinnati have been at times this year in terms of their record and how good Denver has been throughout the year. So they're definitely going to be playing their starters. They have one of the higher implied team totals on this slate. It's ranked at 7th. If you look on the website, it's going to make it look like this is a really bad matchup for Bo Nix because it's Kansas City. But again,
they're resting Kansas City. Yeah,
they're resting their starters. Like, there's no Chris Jones this week, so it's going to be a different ball game for them. So I'm going to bet on it there. And the reason I'm betting on that and trying to find different ways is, in part, Ryan, you've picked what I think is the obvious matchup to target this week, the Carolina Atlanta game, because everybody knows that there's something to play for this week, and I think it is worth targeting. So I know I said it was chalky, but I think it's still worth going after, because it is also one of the highest totals on the main slate. I will say, we need to throw this in here real quick. Unless you're playing on FanDuel, if you're playing on FanDuul, you're not going to hear us talk about the Minnesota-Detroit game on this show, because
get into that game as much as you can on FanDuel.
It is a wild total. It's 56.5 points.
Yeah.
Which is like 8 points more than any other game this weekend.
And when you think about it, Austin, you could almost build your entire team on FanDuel out of that alone and get out of it pretty nicely. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I play in just a league with 3 of my buddies on FanDuel, and I think I'm going to get wild and go like all Minnesota, Detroit, because they won't do that. Like, they're going to be very stereotypical and spread everything out. And so it's going to look like I'm the worst DFS player ever until 8:00 on Sunday night. I look forward to it. Austin already alluded to this, and Austin, I'll just give you my simple thought process here. I'm picking Michael Penix simply because I think Bijan Robinson is the chalk. Now, here's the thing. We just saw someone win a tournament with Baker Mayfield, Bucky Irving. So there's a chance Penix and Bijan is a stack that people are willing to play. But I will say, for my quarterback, my wide receiver, and my bring back, if you go with one of my guys, you're going with all 3 of my guys. And that's where I could have gotten a little bit more contrarian. I will give you that. And I'll also throw out there, I also think there might be something to just a Michael Penix, Kyle Pitts stack, because I don't hate Pitts at all this week. And I think everyone's going to go in on London, who I'm going to talk about. But I feel like there's maybe something there on leaving London off to be a little different and taking the win at tight end, or maybe even going London and Pitts, though that feels like you're getting a little bit too crazy when it comes to Michael Penix. So,
well, and I think I was a little bit maybe too strong in how I was coming at you about this. So I think this matchup will be probably one of the most popular ones to target. But I think you're right that it will be more people will want to go towards the Bijan Robinson side of it. And I do think that within this matchup, there's still ways to get unique and creative. And I think having Michael Penix is a great way to do that. You could, like what you said, stacking Michael Penix and Bijan Robinson. Like, I'm fine with that. Like,
Yeah, that adds the variance a little bit there. So
yeah, exactly. And I like the idea of a Kyle Pitts stack. Like, people aren't really going to want to play him. They're not super excited about Kyle Pitts these days. So there are ways to still get creative with this lineup. I think if you're playing Bijan Robinson, you should just know that you're probably eating a lot of chalk right away.
Yeah.
And so then you're going to need to get different.
You have to get weird elsewhere.
Yeah.
And then, Austin, as we move on to the running backs, this is where, so like, obviously your first running back here, we got to make sure he's playing. So this is like one that you're setting your lineup Sunday morning, because Josh Jacobs is a guy who's being rumored to possibly sit this week.
Yeah. And he has a little bit of an injury designation. So this one is a little bit TBD for sure. But I do think if he does play, it is worth playing him against Chicago. If he doesn't play, I might just eat the chalk and go with Bijan Robinson at that point, honestly.
Yeah.
But it's because the matchup is really good, and Green Bay does have seeding to play for. There is something in it for them this week. And when Green Bay is playing from ahead, they are often running the ball. They are one of the most like predictable game script teams in the league. When they're ahead, they're running it. When they're behind, they're passing it. It's very cut and dry for them. And so if they're beating Chicago, Josh Jacobs is probably a big reason why. So I like that there. On the other side, for my running back choice, I'm looking at Kenneth Gainwell because he's the backup to Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley is not starting. And Kenneth Gainwell, he has gotten, like, this isn't just like, oh, he's the next guy on the depth chart. In games where Philadelphia has been ahead this year and they've sat their starters, Kenneth Gainwell all of a sudden gets all the touches and has been super utilized. So I could see that happening very easily here again this week.
Yeah. And Gainwell's sort of like Tyler Algier light, where like he's shown he has some run, but he's stuck now behind this stud. So Gainwell has a lot to prove in this upcoming week, because this is what, his third year in the league. So he's getting close to the end of a rookie deal. Like, Gainwell has a lot to prove this week. And I can't imagine Gainwell doesn't have 101 yards on his mind, because he wants to prove that Saquon could have easily broke this record if he plays in the game. So, Austin, I think I wonder if this is where you think my chalk is, because I went with two backup running backs that are almost certainly going to start. But I've also noticed in rankings, starting with this New England game, I am seeing Ramondre Stevenson ranked higher than Antonio Gibson. They benched Ramondre Stevenson last week and did not give this man the ball. Do we think in week 18 they're just going to give it back to him? And then I was checking Jeff Bell's wonderful incentive article over on Football Guys. Ramondre Stevenson's contract accelerator, he's like 500 yards away from hitting his contract accelerator. Antonio Gibson has already hit level 1 of his accelerator, and he happens to be 137-ish yards away from hitting total yards from scrimmage, from hitting level 2 against a backup Buffalo defense. So that is where I'm going with Antonio Gibson. Is this one, like, I feel like nobody's going to play Gibson, but am I just blinded by the fact that like everybody sees what I see?
No, I like this pick. I was saying your talk was going after the Atlanta Carolina.
Oh, okay, perfect. Okay, I thought you were going after all my picks. I didn't know if I was going to have to defend all of them here. Okay.
No, you're good.
Okay, perfect. Well, then I'm not going to spend too much more time defending Antonio Gibson. And then, Austin, I wrote in the show sheet, keep an eye on Blake Corum. I'm reading everywhere Kyron Williams is out, and I just feel like Blake Corum, of all the people who have something to prove, this kid could not get on the field this season because Sean McVay only gives the ball to his starting running back. Well, if Blake Corum is the starting running back this week, and I know the Rams have nothing to play for, but they also have a pretty decent matchup with nothing to play for, I feel like Blake Corum could just be a shocker this week with a team, an offense that we've seen a starting running back score 3 touchdowns in a game. I feel like Blake Corum is a sneaky fun play this week.
Yeah, I definitely like the Blake Corum pick, and he's someone that I'll be looking at. It's also interesting because if you did something like Kenneth Gainwell, Blake Corum, then you could pay up at a couple of places for wide receiver. So there's definitely ways to get creative, especially if you're playing that FanDuel game where you may want to get up to Amon-Ra St. Brown and also Justin Jefferson, like being able to do that on FanDuel, you're going to need to save money.
Oh, you have to
elsewhere.
go so cheap at running back.
And so doing like Kenneth Gainwell and Blake Corum could be a really great way to make that happen.
Yeah, that's essentially what I'm leaning into. Obviously Gainwell, a good one, but I like, obviously I've already mentioned it, Gibby as well, just because now Gibby's worth monitoring because who knows who they're going to start. They may start Ramondre Stevenson as punishment, like go play week 18. But again, who knows what's going on with that situation, because when they announced Ramondre Stevenson was benched last week, we all assumed it was like a ceremonial benching yet again, like they did a few weeks prior. It was not. It was the Antonio Gibson show, and he went for like 63 yards, which isn't terrible. But again, he's going against the Buffalo defense that is not going to be the real Buffalo defense. Not that the Buffalo defense has been one to worry about. Austin, as we move on to wide receiver, you have all of my favorite players. When you talk about one of these guys, I was heartbroken. I was $100 away from getting him into my lineup, and I could not figure out how to do it. And I don't want to make any changes. But go ahead and talk about your wide receivers, and I'll lament my heartbreak when you get to them. So,
well, first off, I mentioned that I'm starting Bo Nix at quarterback, so I'm going to stack him with Cortland Sutton.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think it's interesting to go back to Marvin Mims after we saw Marvin Mims get so much volume last week, but I'm going with Cortland Sutton because he's been that stud throughout the season. Outside of that, I'm looking at Brian Thomas Jr., who just continues to be ridiculously targeted. I was thinking like, Jacksonville, it's week 18. It's really over, right? Like, it's been over for like 5 weeks for these guys.
And they don't
And
care.
Brian Thomas is getting like 12 targets a game.
Yeah.
Absolutely berserk. So I'm making it happen.
$100, Austin. I could not get him into my lineup. Like when I saw where he was, I was like, oh, please be 7,200. And he's 7,300. I was like, I hate this game so much.
Yeah, the apps, they really know how to make those numbers.
They did. They were like, who's going to build this lineup? Who's going to go Blake Corum, Antonio Gibson? Let's make sure we price Brian Thomas appropriately. I'm sure that's what they were thinking of.
Yeah, I'm sure. Specifically targeting you, Ryan.
I give them so much money. They have to make sure I don't ever get any of it back. So anyway.
So next on my list in that same matchup is Michael Pittman if Joe Flacco plays.
Yeah.
This was one of the sneaky plays last week. I played Michael Pittman in a lineup, and it was fabulous for me because Joe Flacco brought this man back to life. I think it seems unlikely Anthony Richardson plays. He's still having issues with these back spasms. I could see him sitting, but stay tuned to that.
Have to pay attention.
If Joe Flacco is starting, play Michael Pittman. If not, maybe pay $100 more for Josh Downs. Like Josh Downs is they're really closely priced, I think.
Interesting.
In part because there was some ambiguity about who was going to be the starting quarterback this week whenever they set the pricing. So I like Michael Pittman. And then my last guy, I mentioned that I was going to be targeting another Panthers receiver. I'm looking at Jalen Coker. Again, I don't think that AJ Terrell is going to be on Coker that much. I think he will focus most of his energy on Adam Thielen when he is there, but he moves around a lot again. So it's not going to be stuck on Adam Thielen. Thielen's still fine for cash, but I think it does provide opportunity for Coker to get open. We also don't know if Xavier Legette is going to play, so keep an eye out for that. If Legette doesn't play, this becomes even a bigger target in my mind to go with Coker, but it's really just betting on I need Jalen Coker to line up against D offered 8 times and get targeted on 5 of those, and I think we'll be good.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. And Coker seems to be the guy who is breaking wide open for the deep touchdowns, which is in a tournament play. That's what you're looking for. And week 18 just feels like the right week for an undrafted rookie free agent wide receiver to pop off and probably secure that roster spot for next year that Coker seems to deserve. If he pops off this week, I think it'd be hard for Carolina to move on from him next year.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
For me, this is where Austin was hitting me with the chalk, because honestly, as I look at these 3 names, it's super chalky and nothing like discounting myself as we get started. I don't know if I would actually build this lineup in a tournament, putting it bluntly. So because I'm going with Michael Penix, I'm going to stack with Drake London. Right away, I think the new idea Austin and I cooked up of stacking with Bijan or Kyle Pitts is a better idea. My bring back is Adam Thielen. Right away, Jalen Coker feels like the better bring back. So take Austin's advice there. And then Austin, I know this is chalk. and we kind of talked about the risk that is involved in this, but Jalen McMillan for the cheap price is my favorite play this week, just because he feels like the right chalk. Either we're all going to win or we're all going to lose together. And the fact of the matter is this, he of all of those wide receivers priced under like 5,500, he's the only one with like 2 and possibly even 3 touchdown upside proven. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah, no, I definitely hear that. I will say, coming back to your Drake London and Adam Thielen stuff, I would be comfortable doing some double stacks on both sides of the ball. Like playing Bijan Robinson and then 2 Panthers receivers. I don't think that's going to be that common.
No, certainly not. As long as it works.
Yeah. Because I think that people like, you might be like, oh, well, this game will probably be competitive. But then the more times you hit buttons for Atlanta Falcons players and Carolina Panthers players, the NFC South, you're going to be like, this can't work. Possibly.
At some point, I'm pretty sure if you build a lineup of all Falcons and Carolina Panthers, DraftKings is going to pop up and be like, we encourage you to play responsibly because it just feels wild.
And so I do think, like, if you're going to play like this lineup, I think it's worth like targeting this game, like playing four players from this game is an interesting strategy.
It makes sense as long as the salary makes sense. The problem is they've caught on to Adam Thielen, so they're pricing him appropriately now. They've been pricing Drake London appropriately. If Darnell Mooney could just prove something, I feel like a Darnell Mooney stack with Penix and maybe Darnell Bijan. Like there's some interesting things there, but like it's just so hard to trust these guys. If I'm building multiple lineups, I can have fun with this. But like the way I've been doing things where I'm just building one tourney lineup and entering into like some different tourneys, I hate my own strategy as we talk about it, Austin. I like the players you've given me better because again, I put this together this morning and I knew McMillan was going to be chalk. I guess I just went with the contrarian on. I feel like so many people are going to want to build Bijan lineups because Jonathan Taylor was the good chalk last week and it worked out. And so it's just like, you want pieces of this good chalk. And so I just feel like Bijan is the safest, chalkiest, best play at running back this week because we don't have Saquon Barkley. And I feel like that's going to be easy for the more casual players like myself to go with Bijan. The sharps are going to understand that and they're going to build, 50 Bijan lineups and then 100 lineups without him in it. So it makes sense. So again, the more I talk about my lineup, the less I like it. I like the top of it. I would just redo all of my wide receivers. Guess what? That probably means I can make room for Brian Thomas when I do that. So that makes me happy. Austin, let's move on to these tight ends because we're going with a guy most people, I won't say they haven't heard of because you've definitely heard of him this season, and a guy that a lot of people forgot about until last week. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Noah Gray is the backup tight end. He's the number 2 tight end for Kansas City, and they're probably going to be resting Travis Kelce this week. And they still target the tight end position regardless.
Yeah.
Like I think they're still going to run their offense. So Noah Gray, like he could be in for actually a pretty big day. He's probably cash viable too, I would say.
Yeah,
I just decided that. Yeah, let's put him in a tournament as well because also the way I built my lineup, like I need to save some money at some point, and so Noah Gray actually provides a really good option for that. And I think he might have some more upside than some of the other players because we've seen him have multi-touchdown games while competing with Travis Kelce for touches. Now, I will throw out there the nuance to this is there's not going to be Travis Kelce to draw attention away from Noah Gray, which is one of the ways that they've set him up so well this year.
Yeah.
But he still could get a lot of target volume, which I think will be helpful this week.
Yeah, I think he's an interesting play mainly because the Kansas City Chiefs, while aren't going to be playing their starters, they have some interesting players at almost all the skill positions, even as a backup. And we're talking Carson Wentz. Like, he hasn't played in a while, but we have to imagine he still knows how to throw the ball. And let's not forget, Carson Wentz loves the tight end. And so I think there's a situation where we see Carson Wentz get his tight end involved. And I don't know how Kansas City practices, but I imagine Noah Gray in practice is Carson Wentz's primary tight end. Like, we should see some practice field carryover chemistry. And I think he's an interesting play. For me, I went with Zach Ertz because I wanted a part of the Washington team that needs to win a game. And Ertz scored 2 touchdowns last week, which could make him a little chalky, but then other people are going to be like, he's like 40 years old. How much of this does he have left in the tank? Dallas is not a good defense. They're terrible against tight ends. I think Zach Ertz has become a safety blanket for Jayden Daniels. And again, as Brian Robinson has really struggled, Ertz has kind of been the guy who has done it for Jayden Daniels in the red zone. Ertz hit an incentive last week, but if I read the article correctly, I believe this is kind of crazy. If he scores another 2 this week, there's another multiplier he hits. And if Jayden Daniels seems to be in tune with those types of things, I wouldn't mind seeing Zach Ertz get into the end zone twice again this week, Austin.
Yeah, no, I like this pick, and I think it's a good game to target, because I think one thing that could happen this week is that people will look at some matchups and look and say like, oh, well, this team doesn't have anything to play for. Like Dallas doesn't have anything to play for, so I don't want to go after this matchup. And I think that might be a flawed way of thinking about it. Like, just look for the teams that do have things to play for, regardless of what their opponent is doing. And I think, like, to your point, having Zach Ertz in there is good. And I would stack him with Jayden Daniels in the lineup or two. Like, I think it's fine to go back there. Jayden Daniels has the upside, especially on a slate like this. Like, scoring is probably going to be deflated because of the weirdness of who's starting, who's not in week 18. And so with that, like, you don't need as many points probably than what you typically would. And so having a player that you know can get you 30 points is really beneficial. So Jayden Daniels, Zach Ertz, like, they could combine for 50, 60 points. It's going to set you up really nicely in your lineup.
Especially because most people are going to lean towards McLaurin. They're not going to go all the way to the tight end on a stack. So
yeah.
And then, Austin, I'll get us started on the defense because I kind of already hate my defense, but I did go with the Broncos because, again, when I created this, I was focusing on the teams that have something to play for. And the Broncos are kind of like that happy mix, Austin, of they're playing a team of all backups and they have something to play for. So they're a defense that I've liked a lot this season. They're not all that high priced. I think 7th or 8th on the slate, if I remember correctly. Like, I was pretty surprised at how far down in the slate the Broncos defense was. And the fact that they're at home just kind of adds to this for me. I feel like that crowd's going to be electric in Denver, like it usually is. You got the mile high aspect. You have Carson Wentz, who hasn't played significant playing time this season, though I was just talking him up. All in all, I think this is a good game for the Broncos to get some sacks and turnovers. And that's kind of what you're hoping for out of your fantasy defense.
Yeah, no, I definitely like it. And I think, again, like, you're going up against a backup offensive line in Kansas City that has already been really bad. Like, that's been the biggest flaw of this team all year long. So it actually makes sense that you would target this matchup because the Broncos pass rush has been one of the better parts of their offense. So I'm a fan of that. As for me, I'm going with the New York Jets right now against the Miami Dolphins. Part of this is because they were affordable, what I was looking for. And part of this is because they're probably going up against Tyler Huntley. We don't know Devon Achane's status. I believe he's had a questionable tag this week. So there's some concerns about Miami's health and their ability to move the ball down the field.
Absolutely.
I don't think this team is very motivated, especially after they got thumped by the Buffalo Bills. But nonetheless, maybe they'll come out and say, you know what, week 18, we have something to prove. We have some dignity, and so let's play tough. But it's mostly a matchup situation against.
Well, I think I could be wrong for Miami. And again, I'm not trying to take away from your pick here because it seems like the Jets are playing out. If Cincinnati and Denver lose, Miami can make the playoffs. So
yes, that's actually a really other good point about this is this is a situation, and there are some scattered throughout the weekend where what happens on Saturday is going to be important because, to your point, if Denver wins, this game does not matter for Miami, and that definitely changes.
Then that Jets defense is so good play at that point because now you may see Skylar Thompson get back into the game, and he's somehow worse than Tyler Huntley. So
true.
Yeah. And Achane's not playing at that point. Tyreek's not playing at that point. So yeah, paying attention to the Saturday games before you build your Sunday lineup is going to be super important. Folks, we end the show with a head-to-head. Austin and I are going to announce 2 lineups. This will likely not be the lineups that we play against you guys because I've even gotten smarter and changed my lineups now. Though, Austin, I did notice in Week 16, I did not change my lineup whatsoever. So when we look back at Week 16, the last time we do this in DraftKings scoring. Austin, you got me by 7 points. Both of us played terrible quarterbacks and tight ends, but your wide receivers scored so many points. I had a great running back room, but the fact is we both went with 2 running backs, 4 wide receivers. So your 4 wide receivers went off and my wide receivers did not. It was enough for you to take down the win. That brought you to 7-9 and a chance to even this thing up. However, because we didn't do a week 17 show, and somehow, Austin, in week 17, I took down our entire DraftKings contest, which I'm counting as a win for me, bringing you to 7-10 for the season. You will never know if you're going to go 8-10 or 7-11, but I was able to take you down. I was able to do what Kelly wasn't able to do last season, so I'm pretty happy with myself with that. But Austin, I have a feeling, because of the fact that I hate my own lineup, that you're probably going to be 8-10 when this is all said and done. I'm going with Michael Penix, Antonio Gibson, Blake Corum, Drake London, Adam Thielen. I went with Terry McLaurin, which again, the more I talk about it, the more it feels chalk. And I'm going Zach Ertz. So I actually went with a double stack in this game, the Denver defense. And my consolation prize to not being able to get Brian Thomas Jr. is Malik Neighbors. He does have a questionable tag, so I'll need to pay attention to that. But much like Brian Thomas, the Giants have nothing to play for, but Malik Neighbors is just balling right now. So I'm not super upset. Brian Thomas does feel safer, but I could only afford Malik Neighbors this week. So.
Yeah, I was definitely looking at him at one point too. Okay, so I actually don't like one of my picks too, but it's whatever. It's gonna
for this, it's just fun. And to be honest, neither one of us, I'm not coming back and scoring this. This is just for us to announce to our wonderful fans who have rode with us for 18 weeks. So.
Okay, so my quarterback is Jayden Daniels. This is indeed a cash-based lineup.
Okay.
I don't always do that for this part, but this was very cash-oriented.
Okay.
I have 2 running backs. One is Bijan Robinson. The other one we did not talk about is Michael Carter.
Interesting.
Is the going to be the starting running back this week for the Arizona Cardinals.
Yeah.
Who have been one of the better rushing teams in the league. So I like that. He's only $4,700 on DraftKings too.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Really good. I have 4 receivers. Oh, look at that. We have 2 overlaps in our receivers, Ryan, at least. So I have DeMario Douglas. Did you say you had Jalen McMillan?
No, I left him out of this one. I have McLaurin, not McMillan. So
okay, so I have DeMario, Pop Douglas, and Jalen McMillan, and then our overlap is I have Adam Thielen and Malik Neighbors.
Hey, there we go.
So my tight end, yeah, my tight end is Chig Okonkwo, and my defense for cash was the New York Giants.
All right.
Tanner McKee.
Tanner McKee. I think it's Tanner
McKee.
The fact that we don't know what his name is why the New York Giants are a good play this week, folks. And for the final time, just a reminder, you can still play with us. And the other thing is our lineups, our contests run through the playoffs. So the contests are still going to be there for you guys to keep playing with us even after week 18. Austin, your article runs through the playoffs, correct?
Yes.
And then I don't know if you guys are going to do it this year, but at one point last year, you guys did a whole bunch of O Captain My Captains for each showdown slate. I'm not going to commit you to that. I don't know if you're doing it. If you do, special surprise, there might still be DFS content on our YouTube page. You guys should be following us already. But you can play with us on DraftKings and FanDuel. We did not do a week 17 show, so I do want to announce in week 16 on DraftKings, P for Shizzle, who has won a lot of our contests, won. And in week 17, yours truly, over on FanDuel in week 16, the founder of Club Fantasy, Josh Hudson, takes down the week 16 contest. And in week 17, it was again a name you've heard a ton, Jay Malalaga. So it was 2 Club Fantasy folks and 2 folks who always win our contest. Austin, for the final time this season, remind them of where they can find what types of DFS content you're putting out there.
Yeah. So first off, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Austin_FFL. This is the last episode of DFS Academy for the year, but we'll be back next year. Yes, and then I have my article will drop every Saturday, although we may need to tweak the schedule a little bit during the postseason. We'll figure that one out. But yeah. I have a weekly article that focuses on cash during the regular season. So you'll get the cash picks this week. But as we shift into the playoffs, I start to talk a little bit more about tournaments because it becomes more fun. So be looking at that for that every week at clubfantasyffl.com.
There you go. I'm not going to try to break down a show for schedule for you guys. So this show drops on Friday. This upcoming Saturday, so 24 hours from now, we do our annual airing of the fantasy grievances. So we are going to have a bunch of guests come on, and we're just going to talk about all the things that pissed us off in fantasy this year, and hopefully the lessons we learned and what's going to make it better for next year. So make sure you guys check that show out. If you happen to have a week 18 championship or you just want to ask some DFS questions, we will answer those throughout the show as well. So that's going to be 11 o'clock a.m. Eastern on our YouTube page, the airing of the fantasy grievances. Other than that, I don't know which shows are continuing through the offseason, which ones are taking breaks. But what I can tell you is our Wednesday show, no pun intended, our flagship show, every Wednesday, 9 p.m. Eastern. We do not take any weeks off. So you guys will find us every Wednesday at the very least. Whole off season, we're going to be here for you. We'll answer dynasty questions. We're going to help you guys out. For January, it's big about accountability. So we're going to talk about things that we got right, things that we got wrong, and hopefully, again, what we can learn from it, because that's what this month's entirely all about. For Austin, I'm Ryan. It was a great season. Thank you guys for riding with us. Good luck in your DFS lineups. Good luck in your Week 18 championships. At the very least, we'll see you guys next season. Have a good one.